Hello, everyone, and welcome as we continue our Lenten reading through the 40 chapters of Exodus during the 40 days of Lent. Today's chapter is longer, albeit it is somewhat repetitive after the previous series of plagues that is uh, they are quite substantially disrupting the life, the business flow, and the economy of Egypt, of which we are aware from the previous 8 chapters, the first 20% of this book that we've encountered so far. These factors are so very important to Pharaoh. We've seen in COVID-19 now 3 years ago, how disease can disrupt culture. And now in the first pericope of chapter number 9, once more it's repetitious. Moses goes to Pharaoh, again gives him an opportunity. Let my people go. But if he refused to let them go, there's going to be a plague. And this is going to be worse than COVID-19 for the Egyptians. This is really going to hit their economy hard. It's going to hit the livestock, the horses, donkeys, camels, herds, and flocks. But God's going to spare the flocks of the Hebrews. And once more, as we frequently see throughout Scripture, when humans are living in chaos, disorganized, outside of God's perfect plan, then it has an effect on all creation. And here, the livestock has to suffer as well. And so this happened, but Pharaoh's heart remained hard, it says. For somebody who is so interested in the exploitation of slaves and the growth of the economy, yet his own stubbornness is even stronger than any of those economic factors. Then plague number 6 comes, and the people take on these certain impairments, these boils, both individuals as well as the animals as well. But once more, Pharaoh refuses to listen. He continues to harden his heart. Not only is he stubborn, but he's also very selfish here. Then, plague number 7, a hailstorm comes. But not before, once more, Moses is dispatched to Pharaoh, saying again, let my people go. And Pharaoh refuses, and here comes a hailstorm. Hail in our context is relatively insignificant. It causes damage. It certainly causes many insurance claims, but it's relatively harmless. However, we must suspect that this hailstorm was probably quite significant. But also remember the more the more primitive constructs in ancient Egypt were much more susceptible and much more vulnerable to hail, especially if it was a significant, consistent hailstorm. It could damage all kinds of structures and damage the livestock as well as among other things. It could damage people. And with each one of these things, there's a certain vulnerability detected. There's a certain god of Egypt, a certain divinity that they thought kept them safe from such things. And here God is targeting. And in fact, in verse number 20, Pharaoh's servants had heard this, and they've got enough sense to take the message seriously and try to get their cattle out of the fields. And there it falls. It's hail mingled with fire. And so there was nothing like this in the history of Egypt, it says. Again, this is widespread economic catastrophe here. God is going to break their economy, which is part of Pharaoh's significant pride. Eventually, Pharaoh, he's been bending. Now he's breaking in verse number 27. Pharaoh now calls for Moses and Aaron. Now, remember previously, Moses and Aaron had been dispatched by God to go to Pharaoh. Now Pharaoh is asking for them. And he says, I have sinned this time. I'm guilty and my people are guilty. Well, yeah, the collective is always guilty in participating in the sins of the leader. But yet, nevertheless, this is really Pharaoh's issue. His heart is the one that continues to be hardened. Pharaoh promises once more. I think this is the third time to release the people. Moses, he left Pharaoh, went out of the city. He spreads his hands. The hail ceases. And Pharaoh saw that it had ceased. And it says, verse 34, he sinned again. Both he and his servants hardened their hearts, and he did not release the people. Quite repetitious, quite unnecessary. But nevertheless, this deliverance is going to be clear and plain and demonstrable that that this is God's doing, and really it is Pharaoh who is responsible, who would not listen and heed to the commands of God's servants after all of this. And so really at this point we see that for Pharaoh, there's a certain honor challenge here, as I've mentioned previously, between he and God's represented Moses. And Pharaoh feels like he has to win this thing. How long does he believe that he can ride all of this out? Does he not think that that God can't keep elevating this? And God is going to elevate this, sadly and unfortunately for the people of Egypt. Anyway, I'll call this video short. It's been pretty repetitious. The narrative really starts to take off as we go into the end of this week's reading tomorrow. And so once more, thank you for being with me. And tomorrow we will conclude the first quarter of the book of Exodus.